Connecticut have to keep the other one to one and done.
Hartley from the mid-range, swish. Paul's got two.
My God, a game like this doesn't just make you question the Indiana Fever. It makes you question the WNBA as a whole. Because what unfolded on that Sunday night against the Golden State Valkyries wasn't just bad basketball, it was an absolute spectacle of dysfunction, embarrassment, and exhaustion that had fans, players, coaches, and even broadcasters collectively wondering what in the world they were actually watching. And honestly, whether this was a professional league or some poorly organized middle school scrimmage, where even the volunteer scoreboard operator can keep things running smoother than what we just saw. Because from the opening tip it was pure chaos. Starting with the repeated shot clock malfunctions that destroyed any rhythm, flow, or legitimacy the game might have had, with the Fever's very first possession halted because the shot clock didn't reset, forcing officials to stop the game and creating a 5-minute delay before anyone could even begin to settle into the action. Only for 1 minute of game time, later to see it all break down again in even more catastrophic fashion with another malfunction that lasted nearly 20 minutes. Players sitting on the bench with their arms folded in disbelief, some even retreating to the locker room just to wait it out because nobody knew how long it would take to fix, and the fans who paid good money to attend being subjected to one of the most disjointed first halves in recent basketball memory. And here's the kicker, it wasn't just those two breakdowns. There were 5 separate technical stoppages because of malfunctioning clocks, plus for timeouts, plus for lengthy reviews. And by the time the dust settled, the first half alone had dragged out to an incomprehensible 1 hour and 32 minutes. That's 92 minutes for just 2 quarters, almost the entire length of a normal WNBA game, meaning fans basically sat through a marathon of delays instead of the sport they came to see. And if that doesn't highlight how badly the league botched this, nothing does, because this wasn't just a Fever problem. It was a WNBA operations problem, a leadership problem, and something that landed squarely on Commissioner Kathy Engelbert's shoulders. Because fans shouldn't be forced to endure torture disguised as basketball entertainment, and the league certainly shouldn't be letting something as basic as a shot clock define the narrative of a crucial late-season playoff game. Yet here we are, left to digest an ugly 75-63 Indiana loss that drops the Fever down into the 8th and final playoff seed, hanging by a thread. As if the humiliation on the court wasn't already enough. Because the Valkyries have completely owned Indiana this season, sweeping them in 3 straight games, running them out of the gym with energy, precision, and a barrage of 3-point shooting that made Indiana's zone defense look laughably ineffective. And you could argue that the only real highlight of the night wasn't even something that happened during live play, but instead Caitlin Clark walking into the arena pre-game, smiling, greeting fans, her presence alone sparking the loudest cheer of the night. And that might genuinely have been the best moment, because from the opening tip to the final buzzer, the Fever looked flat, disorganized, and entirely unprepared to handle a Valkyries team that is peaking at the right time, with their coach, one of the smartest hires of the offseason, orchestrating the game plan flawlessly, empowering her shooters, rotating her defense, and exposing every weakness Indiana tried to hide. While meanwhile, Christy Sides and the Fever coaching staff looked helpless, unable to adjust. Unable to spark any energy, unable to prevent the same mistakes from repeating over and over again. And that's why this loss hurts even more, because it wasn't just about one bad night, it was about a pattern. A reflection of the larger inconsistencies that have plagued Indiana all season, where they win just enough to stay relevant but lose badly enough in key moments to keep fans doubting if they truly belong in the postseason picture. And right now, with 4 games left in the regular season, Indiana finds itself at 21-19. Barely clinging to 8th place behind Seattle and Golden State, both of whom hold the head tiebreakers, which means Indiana can't afford to simply tie in the standings. They actually have to finish ahead by at least 1 game, especially because Los Angeles, sitting 9th, owns the head-to-head advantage too, which adds another layer of pressure. So while fans want to believe this Fever team can hang on, the truth is that after watching them collapse in every game against Golden State this year, including this disaster, it's hard to feel confident. And what makes it worse is how the officiating compounded the frustration, because not only were there endless stoppages for clocks and reviews, but blatant travels were ignored, with Natasha Howard practically strolling down the court like she was on a Sunday morning walk in the park, ball in hand, 5 steps, no dribble, no whistle, multiple times. And it felt like the refs either didn't care or had completely lost control of the game. Because if fans at home can count 5 separate travels and none of them are called, then, what exactly are these officials doing? And this all ties back into why this game felt like one of the hardest, most exhausting slogs of the entire season. Because basketball is supposed to have rhythm, flow, a competitive spirit, but instead, what we got was a circus of malfunctions, miscalls, and misery that dragged on endlessly. And the Fever not only lost the game, they lost momentum, confidence, and potentially their grip on the playoffs. Because now every matchup matters exponentially more. With a road game at Phoenix next, where the season series is tied. Followed by Chicago, who they've beaten 4 times but still can't overlook. Washington, who is already eliminated but could play spoiler, and Minnesota, who is locked into the top seed and might rest starters or might try to send a message. And every single one of those games now carries the weight of Indiana's season. Because while mathematically they're still alive, emotionally, and competitively they look like a team spiraling, one that has given away too many chances, wasted too many opportunities, and shown too many flaws. And all of that was exposed yet again by Golden State, a team that not only swept them but did so convincingly, bombing threes against the zone, pushing pace whenever the clock actually worked, and making Indiana's offensive struggles glaringly obvious. Because in a game where the Fever shot just 35% from the field in the first quarter, you could tell right away this wasn't going to be a comeback story. It was going to be another long night of frustration. And as fans sat through those never-ending delays, they knew deep down this wasn't just about one bad night or one bad opponent. It was about whether this Fever team has the resilience, leadership, and execution necessary to belong in the postseason. And if what we saw on Sunday is any indication, then Indiana fans better buckle up. Because the ride from here on out is going to be bumpy, stressful, and possibly short-lived, unless drastic changes happen fast. Because the loss to the Valkyries wasn't just another L in the standings. It was symbolic. A mirror held up to the Fever's season, showing every flaw all at once: poor execution, questionable officiating, disastrous operations, lack of adjustments, failure to capitalize on crucial games, and while the players themselves will say all the right things in post-game interviews about fighting through adversity and controlling their own destiny, the truth is clear to anyone who watched that debacle. Indiana isn't just battling opponents right now, they're battling themselves. The league's dysfunction, and time running out on their
To get through, but Mitchell's really only gotten open in transition. Right there, creating for herself because she stops on a dime, the defense blows by her.
Through the stop-and-go chaos of the first quarter, which felt less like a professional basketball game and more like an endless parade of stoppages, whistles, resets, and frustrated glares, the Golden State Valkyries somehow managed to stay in rhythm from 3-point range, as if the technical problems and bizarre pacing of the game didn't even apply to them. Because every time Indiana thought they might find a spark, or at least regroup, after the repeated shot clock malfunctions, Golden State calmly spaced the floor, zipped the ball around with precision, and buried catch-and-shoot 3-pointers that completely exposed Indiana's vulnerable zone defense, going a ridiculous 7 of 8 from beyond the arc in just the first 10 minutes. Which not only set the tone for the night, but also immediately drained the Fever's energy, confidence, and crowd support. And the worst part is that Golden State didn't stop there, they kept pouring it on, continuing their hot shooting from deep throughout the game, finishing with an absurd 12-19 mark from 3, while also shooting over 50% from the field overall. And that kind of efficiency doesn't just beat you, it demoralizes you. Especially when you're already struggling to find rhythm offensively. Because on the other side of the floor, Indiana could only manage to make 6 3-pointers the entire night, clanking their way to a miserable 20% from beyond the arc, shooting just 32% overall from the field. And that massive shooting disparity explained why the Fever looked helpless, disjointed, and completely outclassed by a Golden State team that came in prepared, focused, and determined to sweep the season series. While Indiana, meanwhile, looked like a group that had left its confidence in the locker room. And whenever adversity is mentioned around the league, especially in the WNBA where travel schedules are brutal and parity is high, the discussion always circles back to teams like the Fever, who not only had to weather the storm of a disorganized game night marred by operational breakdowns but also the harsh reality of playing without their superstar, rookie Caitlin Clark, a player whose presence on the court fundamentally changes everything. Her ability to drop dimes left and right, stretch defenses, create opportunities, and lift her teammates' energy is unmatched. And when she's missing, the Fever lose their most dynamic weapon, which forces others to step up, particularly veterans like Kelsey Mitchell, who has carried the scoring load and leadership burden in Clark's absence. But even her efforts weren't nearly enough against the onslaught, and the frustration of Fever fans was only magnified by the long pauses and delays. With social media lighting up in real time, as clips circulated of players sitting idly, broadcasters trying to fill dead air, and fans voicing their outrage, with posts across X and other platforms mocking the league for looking amateurish and voicing that Indiana deserved better. And that's when Stephanie White's post-game comments gained traction, because while she's now the coach of Connecticut, and not directly involved in this matchup, fans resurfaced one of her older interviews as a voice of reason, pointing out how shot clock issues at the start of a game can absolutely affect rhythm, momentum, and focus. Explaining that while it might not directly change readiness, it's disruptive in ways people underestimate, since basketball is a sport of rhythm, timing, and flow, and when those are repeatedly shattered by stoppages, it makes it almost impossible for players to stay locked in. So her reminder about controlling what can be controlled resonated, yet it only highlighted how Indiana completely failed to do even that, because when play resumed, instead of refocusing, they came out flat, sluggish, and mentally rattled, and the Valkyries pounced, and the defensive miscues were glaring, as Ariel Atkins and others pointed out in post-game analysis, because when a team like Golden State is spacing the floor, moving the ball crisply, and firing off on time-on-target passes, you simply cannot afford defensive mistakes. Yet Indiana overhelped, overedited, and mistimed nearly every coverage, leaving wide-open shooters to knock down dagger after dagger, essentially gift-trapping the game for Golden State. And it exposed the lack of discipline and communication in Indiana's defensive schemes. Because while they said in the game plan, they wanted to limit catch-and-shoot threes and avoid overhelping on drivers, they ended up doing the exact opposite, rotating too far, arriving late, and leaving their perimeter defenders stranded. And the result was a shooting clinic that Indiana simply could not match on the other end. And this ties back to the larger problem Indiana faced all night, which is that when you're constantly taking the ball out of the net after made baskets, you never get the chance to run in transition, you never get easy buckets, and you never get the defense scrambling, so your offense becomes predictable and stagnant. And that's exactly what happened, because Indiana, instead of pushing the ball with pace, jogging it up the floor and allowing Golden State to set its defense, looked, timid, tentative, and completely devoid of aggression. And against a team that's one of the best defensive units in the league, that's a death sentence, because once they've set up, they suffocate you. Close driving lanes, contest jumpers, and force low percentage shots, which is why Indiana's shooting numbers were so horrific, and watching it unfold was painful because you could see the opportunities slipping away, the hesitation piling up, and the body language sagging as players realized they were letting the game get away. And to make matters worse, this wasn't just any regular season game. It was one with major playoff implications, because every contest matters in this tightly packed WNBA standings picture, and Indiana, by losing, didn't just take another L, they dropped critical ground in the race, slipping from 6th to 8th, the final playoff seed, with Golden State owning the tiebreaker, meaning the Fever now have to finish a full game ahead instead of just tying. And with Los Angeles lurking in 9th and holding the head-to-head